suona la mezzanotte in quella cella. E mi svegliava a tuono d'una campana. E Dio del cielo abbia pietà di me. Sono chiuso in questa cella e faccio preghiera a te.
Back in March 1981, Rosario was originally going to go on trial with his brother Joe, but because of medical issues, he had polyps on his throat. His case was severed and set for a later date. He had presented the court with medical proof of his condition. However, when these issues came up, U.S. District Attorney Mark Summers was suspicious, an ongoing theme with these Gambino brothers, and told news media that he believed Rosario wasn't having throat surgery at all, but instead was going under the knife to alter his appearance before trial. In January of that same year, law enforcement circulated another rumor about the Gambino brothers, this time focusing on Rosario. The bogus rumor about the two brothers hijacking the SS Poet right before Joe's trial failed, so they threw another one out for the public to munch on. The rumor? Someone sent Rosario a dead fish in the mail. Supposedly, Rosario had moved out of Cherry Hill, and sources told the press that the dead fish was mailed to his home in Cherry Hill and forwarded to his new address in Brooklyn. When asked why Rosario would have received such a thing in the mail, the anonymous sources related a story about dead fish and mafia lore and speculated that he had received a special gift because of the upcoming trial. The story certainly made for good newspaper fodder while Rosario was waiting for his day in court. Rosario stepped into the courtroom in August 1981. Like his brother, Rosario was facing charges of distributing heroin and conspiracy to distribute heroin. Also like his brother, Rosario had to face testimony from the prosecution's main witness, Francesco Raleigh, also known as Felix the Cat. Only this time, Raleigh told the court that Rosario was the mastermind of the drug trafficking scheme. He said Rosario was the main guy, the highest authority, even though back in March he had claimed that Joe was the man in charge. Raleigh added that Rosario was the one who had almost killed Paul Zanurko, taking him to a house in Brooklyn, hanging him in the rafters with a telephone cord, shoving a gun in his mouth, and demanding to know where the missing heroin was. But this go-around, the jurors believed at least part of Raleigh's story. Rosario was acquitted on the distribution charge, but the jury was hung on the conspiracy one. He would have to return to court in February 1982 to face that charge. After the trial, Rosario's lawyer told reporters if his name wasn't Gambino, he would never have been prosecuted. When Rosario returned to court in February 1982, the case was over in a week. Rosario was acquitted of the conspiracy charge as well. Despite their acquittals, law enforcement was applying as much pressure as they could, in every way they could, on the Gambino brothers. In November 1981, Joe was found guilty of liquor license violations at Valentino's, now New York, New York, by the New Jersey State Division of Alcohol Beverage Control, or the ABC. He was accused of failing to keep proper books and had apparently employed people with arrest records. The ABC had a strict rule regarding people with arrest records working in establishments with a liquor license. These criminally disqualified persons weren't allowed to work at restaurants serving liquor. Through his lawyer, Joe claimed that he didn't know about anyone's arrest record because the employees had lied on their applications. It didn't matter. Valentino's liquor license was suspended for 60 days. Joe tried to reinstate his license, but was unsuccessful after numerous attempts. Even in 1984, Joe was making an attempt to get the license back, but was repeatedly blocked by the Cherry Hill Town Council. The council was reluctant to reissue a license to someone with his reputation, referring to Joe's 1980 drug smuggling charge for which he was acquitted. The town solicitor, Ralph Kemek, said that despite Joe's acquittal, he believed the 1983 tax evasion charge was another consideration as to why Joe shouldn't receive a new liquor license. If I remember the statutes, Kemek said, tax evasion is an offense of moral turpitude. Eventually, Joe gave up the idea of reopening his beloved restaurant and much later apparently built a condo complex on the property. The following year, John faced his own legal challenges, but surprisingly got a little unexpected help from Uncle Sam. The famous Italian judge Giovanni Falcone had had his eye on John Gambino since even before the 1979 Sindona affair, and on January 25, 1982, he finally got his man, or so he thought. In a 1,000-page indictment, John was charged, along with 75 others, for being involved in a heroin smuggling ring which Falcone claimed was a $560 million a year business, with money laundered and then reinvested in real estate in Italy. As closely as Italy and the U.S. had been working together to put a stop to heroin smuggling allegedly perpetrated by the Gambino brothers, the indictment took the FBI by surprise. They claimed they had no idea it was coming. Still, while the two countries had a common goal, U.S. authorities refused to extradite John, who had become a legal U.S. citizen in 1964. John was convicted in absentia at a later date and sentenced to 7 years in prison. As long as he stayed out of Italy, he wouldn't be arrested, but this conviction would come back later to haunt him. Meanwhile, there was a restaurant war brewing in Cherry Hill. Apparently, the alleged pizza wars of the late 1970s had crossed over to the restaurant business as well by the early 1980s. In October 1982, Valentino's, or New York, New York, was heavily damaged in a fire. Local police suspected arson. They also believed the fire was part of a war between Joe Gambino and Franco Longo, a Sicilian immigrant who owned a nearby disco called Franchins. Franchins had been damaged by a fire the day before the fire at Valentino's. Longo dismissed the rumors, telling a local newspaper, "That's garbage, I tell you. That's not true." He said that he and Joe Gambino were friendly, that Joe had eaten at his restaurant many times, and that he never felt threatened by his competitor. Law enforcement didn't believe that Longo was mob-connected. However, Longo had gone to the police the previous year, claiming he was roughed up by a few alleged Gambino associates. He also claimed at the time that he had been receiving calls at all hours telling him to get the fuck out of Cherry Hill. Longo decided not to press charges, and the matter was dropped. The arsons at both restaurants were never solved. As a side note, there was a rumor, whether it was true or not, that the true owner of Valentino's was indeed Rosario Gambino, and that his two brothers, John and Joe, hated the restaurant so much because of all the headaches it caused that they themselves had started the fire at Valentino's. Joe was even caught with a gasoline container in his car the night of the fire as he was sitting in an empty parking lot not too far away from the restaurant. A cop had moseyed on over to see what was going on, but Joe assured him he was just there to rest. But nothing ever came of it, and that story I just told is just a rumor. Things in Cherry Hill remained quiet for a time, until that 1980 drug trafficking case finally came around in Italy. Even though both Joe and Rosario had been acquitted in the U.S. for those same 1980 drug trafficking charges, the two brothers still faced trial in Italy. In June 1983, Joe and Rosario were convicted in absentia and sentenced to 20 years each. Others who were charged in the case were convicted in Italy as well. Emanuele Adamita received 20 years. Domenico Adamita received 18 years, and Antonio Adamita received 15 years. A month after the Italian convictions, U.S. District Attorney Mark Summers, who tried 14 defendants in Brooklyn, reflected on the case in an interview he did with the Democrat and Chronicle newspaper in Rochester, New York. Out of the 14 defendants he tried, only 2 were convicted, Zernurko and Silvestrini. It was a reality for which Summers was not proud. He told the newspaper it happened because the trials were held separately. "The judges wouldn't let us put all the evidence before the jury," Summers said, "so that none of the juries heard the whole scheme." Summers retired from the U.S. District Attorney's Office in 1985 and later became a partner in a New York City law firm where he specialized in federal criminal defense and appellate cases. Despite his losing streak, Summers was able to keep his promise to Francesco Raleigh and John Aguito. Both of the Alitalia cargo handlers had pled guilty, but because of their assistance with the case, they had only been sentenced to 1 day's probation, and neither were charged in Italy. The drug trafficking case was finally and completely over, but that didn't mean things were going to stay quiet in Cherry Hill for long. Matteo and Salvatore Salina were brothers who were soldiers in John's crew and owned several pizza parlors in the New Jersey and Philadelphia areas. Salvatore had been one of the men convicted in absentia in Italy for the 1980 drug trafficking case. Within days of each other in November 1983, both Matteo and Salvatore were found shot in the head multiple times, their bodies wrapped in green trash bags and stuffed in the trunk of a car. Philadelphia mobster turned informant Yogi Merlino later claimed Joe Gambino was behind one of the murders and that the Salina brothers were killed because they had been stealing money, then gambling it away. When a local newspaper contacted law enforcement for more details after the murders, one source said, "It may come as a surprise to you, but these guys really don't file an operational plan with us, telling us who they are going to kill and why. Matter of fact, I don't remember them holding any press conference either. It would make things a lot easier, but it would take a lot of the fun out of it. They'd rather kill someone and make it a big surprise for us, the press, and most importantly, the target. Then they dare us to figure out who did it and why, and hope we can prove it." Although law enforcement tried to tie the Gambino brothers to the killings, nothing ever came of it, and the murders were never solved. While law enforcement displayed a rare sense of humor, the same couldn't be said about the IRS. On December 29, 1983, Joe and Rosario were indicted by a federal grand jury on tax evasion charges. The charges were brought 1 month before the statute of limitations were set to expire. The IRS claimed the Gambino brothers had defrauded them of $17,700 in taxes by falsifying a corporate federal income tax return. They were also accused of misleading First People's Bank of Haddon Township. These charges stem from Joe and Rosario's failed attempt to open the Don Giovanni restaurant in Cherry Hill back in 1978. When they couldn't open the restaurant, the brothers had sold the property to the Victoria Station restaurant chain for $500,000. The IRS said Joe and Rosario listed a $90,000 check as an expense, which reduced their net profit to just a little over $350 on the sale. The IRS further claimed that the check was written to a fake individual by the name of Gianni Palazzo, and that Palazzo was in actuality Rosario Gambino, who then cashed the check and pocketed the cash. If convicted, the two would face 10 years in jail and a $120,000 fine each. But the case wouldn't go before a jury until February 1985. By the end of 1983, Joe had decided to move out of the increasingly hostile Cherry Hill area back to Brooklyn. It's unclear when Rosario jumped the ship, but no matter when he did, he couldn't escape the penetrating eye of law enforcement. On March 6, 1984, Rosario was arrested on charges of conspiracy to distribute heroin, distribution of heroin, and illegal use of the telephone. 9 others were arrested with him, including his brother-in-law Erasmo Gambino and cousins Antonio Gambino, Anthony Spatola, and Mario Gambino. Rosario's bail was set at $10 million, even though he had no prior felony convictions. In fact, aside from his March 1980 arrest, he had only had minor arrests and was only convicted twice, in 1962 as an illegal alien and in 1969 on a reduced charge of criminal trespassing after a brawl with a police officer. To add to the drama, Antonio Gambino, according to law enforcement, tried to kill himself shortly after being arrested by ramming his body against the bars of his jail cell. He survived. Around this time, the Pizza Connection case was also kicking into high gear, so it was a headline coup for the federal government. Rosario's father's old friend Tommaso Buscetta had become a key witness in that case, which would last through 1987, and John's good friend and associate Sal Catalano would later be convicted along with many others. In September 1984, Rosario once again stepped into the ring with the U.S. justice system. In the trial, DEA agents reported that they had purchased 8 ounces of cocaine and 2 pounds of heroin from Anthony Spatola and Antonio Gambino with the promise of future purchases of 10 pounds of heroin per month for an undetermined amount of time. The agents had posed as Las Vegas drug dealers. U.S. District Attorney Marianne Murphy said during her opening arguments that Erasmo and Rosario kept themselves off stage while maintaining absolute control over the others. She also claimed the defendants used code words such as pizza, champagne, spare tires, cars, and marriage during telephone conversations to talk about the drug operation. The government alleged that prior to the sale, Anthony and Antonio had turned to their cousin Erasmo, who then turned to Rosario to procure the heroin. However, prosecutors weren't able to provide evidence that Rosario was the man behind the scenes. The agents hadn't purchased the heroin directly from Rosario, and in all of their surveillance footage, there was not one image of Rosario entering or leaving any of the Brooklyn cafes they claimed were heroin auction houses. The only footage they had was of Rosario's car parked outside the Cafe Milano. But after the agents had purchased the heroin in an Atlantic City hotel room in exchange for $100,000 cash, they followed the cousins, who had driven immediately to Rosario's home. Whether they were there to discuss Rosario's upcoming surgery as the defense claimed, or to deliver proceeds from the sale as the prosecution claimed, is up for debate. The one thing that is certain, though, is that after Rosario was arrested, 2 $100 bills from the drug sale were found in his dresser after authorities searched his home. The defense did everything they could to dissuade the jury that no exchange of money had been made. Rosario's attorney even used the old standby that if Rosario Gambino was named Schwartz, he would not be sitting at this table. But it was to no avail. One can speculate that maybe one of Rosario's cousins owed him money, and that's why he had the cash. But in the world of law, this kind of evidence is known as circumstantial evidence and can be used by juries in their deliberations. After a 6-week trial and 5 days of deliberations, the jury had reached their verdict, and this time it wasn't in Rosario's favor. On October 23, 1984, Rosario, Erasmo, Anthony, and Antonio were found guilty of all charges. Mario Gambino had previously been acquitted. Prior to Rosario's sentencing hearing, prosecutors delivered a 30-page memo to the court to assist U.S. District Judge Frederick Lacey with the sentencing decision. In this memo, prosecutors included FBI reports that outlined their belief that Rosario was a suspected leader of the Cherry Hill faction of the Gambino family. The prosecution also provided detailed speculations about his involvement in the pizza and cheese war controversy of the late 1970s, suspicions that he was trying to take over competing pizzerias in South Jersey and Philadelphia, information about the files provided to him via Louis Ippolito, and Rosario's alleged involvement in the Sindona kidnapping. It also included information on the 1980 heroin trafficking charge for which he had been acquitted. Whether the government included the speculation about the far-fetched and outlandish SS Poet hijacking plot is unknown. And as an added bonus, the Bureau of Tobacco and Firearms included a report that they had recommended charges be filed and prosecution sought against Rosario and Joe for arson and extortion attempts that they believed the brothers had committed against 3 pizza shops in South Jersey back in the late 1970s. The ATF made it even more nefarious by detailing a rumor that Rosario had allegedly burned one of the cars of a pizza shop owner and then called the manager threatening, "How do you like what we've done to your car? What I did to your car, I'm going to do to you if you don't do what you're told. I'm going to take a gun in my hand and blow your face off. Get wise. Get smart. Close up. Turn your keys in." After presenting the voluminous memo, U.S. District Attorney Murphy, in her quest for a headline-worthy soundbite of her own, told the court the range of activities and Rosario Gambino's demonstrated attitude toward the legal system offer convincing proof that he has little, if any, potential for rehabilitation. The defense argued that much of the information in the memo was unsubstantiated and was information for which Rosario was never arrested, indicted, or convicted. Even Murphy herself couldn't explain why charges were never brought against Rosario on any of the claims if law enforcement strongly believed that Rosario had done everything they suspected he did. Still, it was a nuclear bomb for Rosario, despite Judge Lacey's assurances that he had only considered the evidence from the trial in determining the sentence. Judge Lacey handed Rosario Gambino a sentence of 45 years in prison, the maximum available. Rosario's lawyer was shocked, his family was shocked, and Rosario was shocked too. He turned to his lawyer after the sentence was announced and said, 45 years? Rosario had many more travails in his life, which we won't detail here, but he remained and still remains a favorite target of U.S. federal and Italian law enforcement, even at 80 years old. Now that Rosario was out of the game, John, Joe, and their associates pushed forward, knowing that law enforcement was hot on their heels, and there weren't many bright spots in the murky waters ahead either. In February 1985, Joe and Rosario went to trial on the tax evasion charges from 1983. During the trial, Joe's lawyer honed in on the fake person allegation. He said, "Knowing you are checked by the government at every step, can anyone be so crazy, so dumb, to put down the name of a fake person? No way could an intelligent man do what the government said he did." The jury agreed and acquitted the brothers of all charges. After the trial, Joe's lawyer told reporters, "My client was called dozens of times by the IRS because his name is Joe Gambino." It was a mantra that seemed to be ever present in the Gambino brothers' lives. Later that same year, Joe was arrested for gambling at the baccarat table at the Tropicana Casino Hotel in Atlantic City. He had been banned the previous September because of his alleged links to organized crime. Sometime in 1985, John suffered a stroke which ended up giving him a limp, something that would come into play in 1992. The early to mid-1980s had been a trying time for the Gambino brothers, but it was about to get a whole lot worse. John, Joe, and their associates were going to be inundated with a major rat infestation, thanks in part to the brazen murder of Gambino boss Paul Castellano in December 1985 by John Gotti and his faithful servant, Sammy Gravano. And that's the end of this part of the Cherry Hill Gambino saga. The final chapter is coming soon. So what did you find most interesting about the travails of Rosario Gambino? For me, the most interesting part was Rosario being sentenced to 45 years on circumstantial evidence, and the bogus fish rumor. As mentioned earlier, we'll be putting the entire saga of the Cherry Hill Gambinos back up on our website soon, so if you want to read it, you'll be able to. And if you enjoyed this story, be sure to head on over to thenewyorkmafia.com, where you can read hundreds more deep dive stories on everything organized crime, from the little known to the well known, and everything in between. You could take a free peek inside the Button Guy's world in our free trial section located via a link on our homepage at thenewyorkmafia.com. And while you're there, be sure to browse around and see what else we have to offer. You won't be disappointed. But before you do that, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next episode of Mob Fireside Chat. Thank you for watching. Until next time.